Hi, my name is Harris. I'm one of your podcast hosts. I'm also a lawyer at Treadstone Law. For most Canadians, buying, selling, or refinancing real estate, a lawyer is the last thing on their mind. That's unfortunate because lawyers play a vital role in the process. But what choices do Canadians have? Lawyers can be very expensive. Well, Treadstone Law offers resources to Canadians so they have access to the information they need. Whether you sign up for a live workshop or a mailing list, we cover topics to help you make informed decisions and avoid costly mistakes. It's advice you can start using today, and best of all, it's free. Visit treadstonelaw.ca/MAS offer or click the link below to get access right now. If you're looking to retain Treadstone Law, it's never been easier. Our entire process is online. From completing the retainer agreement to your signing appointment, everything is done from the comfort of your own home. We're your digital lawyers. The best part of it is that you don't pay anything when you're retaining our firm. Visit treadstonelaw.ca/MAS offer or click on the link below to retain us right now. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome to another episode of Hustle and Grit. Today, back on my podcast, I have Josh. Josh is the co-founder of Synergy Mortgage Group out of Hamilton. Welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Hey, Harris. Thanks for having me back.
It's been some time since we last had you on the podcast. I think it was beginning of last year, and I think that what we saw happen, I don't know. I don't think I could have predicted what was going to happen in terms of rate hikes. What's your kind of perspective in last year? Did you kind of in the beginning of the year have an inkling that interest rates are going to go up, or was this kind of out of the blue? What was kind of your brokerage's kind of perspective on 2022?
Yeah, so I actually looked back before we popped on. I think it was back in February that we connected. And yeah, literally like probably a month, 6 weeks out from one of the first rate hikes that we saw, many. And yeah, to answer your question, I mean, I think there was no doubt that rates would be going up. But for me personally, a lot of people kind of within circles of investors and real estate, realtors, other people in the mortgage industry, I don't know that the frequency and the velocity of how high these rates went in that short period of time was really in the range of outcomes. I definitely learned a lot with regard to, just not limiting possibilities, good or bad, of what can happen in certain markets in the future. So yeah, I definitely, we were kind of building out. We always try to build ranges of outcomes for, scenarios for someone's, mortgage or investment plan and budget ultimately. So, if we're going with a variable rate, this is what it is today. This is what we're hearing. Worst case scenario, this is kind of what we see it going to. This, how it impact your payments. So yeah, truthfully, the range of outcomes that, I was building earlier on in the year didn't materialize. It was way worse. And we usually try to do a really good contingency plan of what things can look like in this scenario and the rate piece, looking back at history, the frequency of how often rates have changed and by how much, dating back to the 90s. Never saw anything like this. Rates have gone up like 4%.
Yeah,
4%.
Definitely unprecedented. And I think when we spoke in February, we had no clue. Like I had no clue what was going on, right? That this was going to happen. We were still in the middle of February. We were kind of in lockdowns too, right? We forget about lockdowns because of the rate hikes, but we were still like coming out of the tail end of a 2-year lockdown. March, I think April is when kind of everything went kind of crazy. But we didn't really get any good forward guidance from the Bank of Canada either. It felt like all this happened. They kind of didn't know what they were doing either, but they weren't giving us the foresight or helping us build the foresight to prepare for what came, because prior to these rate hikes, everybody was kind of under the impression that low interest rates were here to stay. Correct me if I'm wrong. You'd know better, right? That they were here to stay.
No. Yeah, no, and I'd cite a a clip that, was very, very popular from the Bank of Canada head, Tiff Macklem, in, I believe it was end of 2020, where it says, rest assured, something to the effect of rest assured that mortgage interest rates will stay low for a very long period of time.
Yeah.
It's a pretty bold statement. Like, usually there's aren't like statements like that, aren't that are so like bold and somewhat aggressive in some ways. Usually they're a little bit more reserved. So, I mean, I'm sure there's always like messaging that's happening, with politics and things like that, for the masses to maybe be less nervous about certain things going on, and ultimately inflation. But yeah, that was end of 2020. We're 2022, so like not even like a year and a half from that statement,
Mm.
it was the polar opposite. Polar opposite. Like, for me, a very long time is more than 1.5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So I agree. I think the reality is that because this is something that hasn't been seen before, in the way in which inflation grew so rapidly, and why the data that the Bank of Canada and economists and analysts they were looking at for guidance or leading indicators in the future wasn't really as useful as how they'd use it in previous maybe studies or modeling in the
yeah.
past, because this was somewhat self-induced in my opinion,
Yeah.
with the lockdown and with everything that transpired as a result of how most governments decided to handle what was going on in the world in 2020.
I mean, you could, the inflation part especially. I mean, for a lot of people, like I felt like the Bank of Canada came off in saying that, hey, oh my God, we didn't know this inflation thing was an issue. But really, you printed off so much money, and everybody's at home not producing anything. What are you going to have but inflation? And all of that kind of did, at least from my perspective, there was a dent in the credibility. Because correct me if I'm wrong. Again, last rate hike, I thought there was some decent messaging that we're not going to get another rate hike. And now it's kind of back on the table that maybe we will, maybe we won't. It's not going to be as extreme. But when they did the last rate hike, I felt like the messaging was, we're kind of done now. We're not doing this anymore.
Yeah, so that's a big piece of what I've some of the insights I had is like, this year the Bank of Canada, in my opinion, really doesn't know what they're going to be doing until probably days before their next announcement, and they're waiting for the latest inflationary data and reporting to come back to them, for them to meet and then make a decision, because there were so many contradictory statements or projections of what was going
Mm-hmm.
to happen. There were times where I think it was in September for October's rate announcement. You saw so many people in the real estate community, analysts, experts, sharing, oh, Bank of Canada's next rate increase is its last. That was in September. You can find articles on that. This should be its
Yeah.
last. And then really, within the matter of 2 to 3 weeks, you're seeing reports, almost all but certain the next Bank of Canada rate announcement will have a 0.75 rate increase. And then, like, leading up to like the day of, it was like a foregone conclusion they were going to be raising it by 0.75, according to mass media, experts, analysts, whoever. And
Yeah.
then on that day they increased it by 0.5. So I mean, honestly, what I've learned is like, you'll have people reference ranges of things or potential outcomes, but they're changing, right, every few weeks with more data of
Mm.
inflation, right? So we had a report come out in the last few days or last week about inflationary drop from December, right? We've seen its lowest drop so far this year too. I think it was like 6.2 or 6.3%
Mm.
year over year where we're at. So I mean, okay, it's a big drop relative to other drops when we're measuring that, but relative to where we need to be, we're still 3 times where the target is, right? The target being around what, 2%, I think, is the
Mm-hmm.
the idea, 2.5% inflation, and we're at 6.3. So great. It did drop. It's a positive sign,
Yeah.
but we're still not close to where the monetary policy and Bank of Canada needs us to be.
Yeah.
So
I, and that's
take the message
insightful.
however way.
Yeah, no, and that's very insightful. So for me though, then okay, so here's my question then, and I'm gonna phrase this question with the caveat, obviously. So given the unpredictability of like what we saw last year, from the beginning of the year, we were in a lockdown and record housing prices, to all of a sudden inflation going out of control. We're looking at like unprecedented rate hikes. We're looking at like unemployment arguably more or less near the lowest it's been for quite some time. And so the Bank of Canada is overall saying that we're not in a recession. They don't really have a fear of recession. Maybe they are kind of on the edge of recession. Who knows? My crystal ball question for you is, I'm not going to ask what you think is going to happen in 2023 because, and if you're welcome to answer, because 2023, again, like 2022, it's all over the place. It's hard. You're only good as your data is. And if your data, everyone's kind of saying, changing every single day, it's difficult to figure out what the sentiment is. What do you think is going to happen over the next 2 years, 3 years, to interest rates? Where do you think, what's like you said, the goal is 2.5% for inflation. What's your guesstimate? Where do you think is the Bank of Canada really going to be holding to that kind of goalpost that they've set for themselves, or are they going to say, listen, what 2.5 is? It was before. Now we're fine with like 4% or 6% inflation. Like, and are they going to then start decreasing interest rates? What's kind of your perspective on what's going to happen to the overall interest rate market ultimately for housing, for residential, for commercial, for investment properties, whatever have it may be, for the next 2 years? What do you think the direction is?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, definitely something that I've been talking about and trying to map out for myself and our plans for clients, partners, agents. Um, I'm not an economist in terms of like real estate, mortgage world. Some of the things that I'm probably seeing is, so like rising rates, right? Or Bank of Canada raising rates.
Hmm.
So, one thing is like that's applicable to variable rate mortgages, right?
Hmm.
Not fixed rate. Fixed rates are tied to the bond market and bond yields. So so some of the rates could be moving in different directions. Okay. Are we talking
Hmm.
about fixed rates? Are we talking about rates, right? Because if we look at the fixed rates, pretty much since early December, we've seen a run on downward pressure on fixed rates. So earlier on in December, majority of fixed rates, regardless of term, were in like into the high fives, mid to high fives, and now they're largely getting into the low end, like sorry, not low fours, high fours to low to mid fives. So there's been some downward
Oh.
pressure there where we're seeing certain fixed rate products. They vary largely between 1 to 5 year terms. I'm just going to speak in general.
Hmm.
We're some insured mortgages, so CMHC insured mortgages with lenders that are in, approaching the mid fours. Okay. And then, we're seeing specials coming out on 3 year terms at, 4.99. We have some other ones at 4.69, 4.79. And then conventional stuff is gravitating to the low fives. As we look at a consensus, right, there's always outliers on each end of the band for that, right? So we're seeing downward pressure there.
Hmm.
What we're hearing from the Bank of Canada and variable rates is, my hope was that, in predicting the next year, that come December and December's announcement, we would have some clarity on the rate increases being over. That was what I was hoping we could get to then see, okay, how long are we going to stay flat for? It's not like, okay, we peaked at, interest rates now with 4% worth of increases. Now all of a sudden, the next announcement in March, we're going to start dropping. No, it's largely consensus. Again, very cautious
Hmm.
when I say that, is that, when they're done increasing, are going to remain flat for a while. So again, latest, news and sources that, I read up on is there's probably a couple more rate increases happening. There's another announcement next week, and then there's one again in March. And yeah, if I'm taking a guess, I'm going to think that between the two, we'll probably see somewhere between zero point 0.5 and 0.75 like total of an increase.
Okay.
So that's, like, listen,
Yeah.
now, we had the largest drop. We had the largest drop in inflation year over year last week that we saw for December's numbers. And a lot of
Mm.
these mechanisms, raising rates and increasing the cost of borrowing and taking money out of the system, it's like a lagging effect, right?
Yeah.
So with each one of the increases, slowly people's budgets are getting tightened. They're spending less money. Real estate values are kind of dropping a little bit with the cost of borrowing being very expensive, people qualifying for less. And so, we just had that in December. We had a rate increase in December. That didn't factor in, that hasn't even taken effect yet with the numbers we saw in December, right? Like, so, in January, we'll have January's report and then February's report. So maybe if that trend continues, maybe we're on the low end of increasing rates. And then on the flip side, if the data shows that, we're staying flat at that 6.3, then maybe we have to be at the high end of increasing rates, right? So it's coming
Yeah.
down to the latest report on inflationary data, because this is what it's essentially all about. And it's like to the minute, what's the data saying? So
Yeah.
I think, I'm hoping that, in the first quarter of this year, so by end of March, we get to that point that I said, some certainty around, are the rates done increasing? Probably, right?
Mm.
And then what I would say is that I would assume that, I'm going to think that, once we get to that point, they're probably going to stay flat for the better part of the year. And then, any kind of decrease maybe at the earliest would happen like probably like I would think, toward the end of this year, probably next year.
Yeah.
And if the decrease, I don't know that it's going to be overly material, like the 1% or the 0.5 or the 0.75 increases that we saw. I think it's going to move a little bit slower on the way down. Again, impacting those in variable rate mortgages, those who are holding debt on home equity lines of credit,
Yeah.
some unsecured debt, typically variable, a lot of it. So that's that. Fixed rates, I don't know, the pressure seems to slowly be trending downward right now. That never, since I've kind of been in mortgages, the value of a fixed rate has never been greater. So I'm not saying that they're the lowest, but the difference of taking a fixed rate
Mm.
versus what you get with a variable rate, sometimes, like, there were times where they were close, they were almost identical, but now
Yeah.
the gap where how much lower a fixed rate is than a variable with conventional like A lending, it's crazy. Like it's tough to justify today. So if you're already in a variable, it's a different conversation to convert into a fixed. Okay, I'm
Mm.
just talking about if you have to get a mortgage now, you're coming out of a renewal, you're purchasing a home, purchasing investment property. It's tough to not look at the fixed, and like the longer the fixed, the better the deal right now. So
Mm.
you have rates, with some that, like, say 4.99, 4.79 on a 5-year term, and then their 2 or 3 year rates are like low to mid fives.
Oh
So you're
wow.
like, oh, well, why wouldn't I just take the lowest rate? Okay. Um, that makes sense in a lot of ways, but then it's like, okay, well, if it's, you don't want to try to time anything, especially in this world right now, but like you're going to try to time, I'm like, some of the stuff that I'm doing that I know I'm going to be holding, I'm looking at that 2 to 3 year window of fixed. I kind of want to be a bit more flexible 2 years from now, maybe
Yeah.
three. Like 3 years is also like pretty good discount compared to the two. The two is kind of like the worst value, but I also see it as, like, for me, like timeline wise, that's kind of when I'd like to be a free agent in the mortgage world where I can kind of keep my options open. So
So are you
short
kind of
term fix.
suggesting? Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was kind of like done my point. The short term
Yeah.
fixed, like from a bridge to like when hopefully we would predict rates to come down and be a bit more
Yeah.
attractive. I'm thinking is that 2 to 3 year window, but again, like that's based on what I'm seeing today, which can change. Obviously, we learned that this year.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So you're kind of saying that 3 years there's going to be some breathing room with the rates. Now, I just want to for all my listeners, this question right now has been the most like it's already a difficult question to answer. But given our current economic
Yeah.
climate, given the current economic climate, it's more difficult than ever before. And my reasoning, Josh, to ask you this question is because from what I know, it's better, like even when like, and this is what kind of my father raised me on, was like a wise person, even when they're wrong they're right, and for lack of better words is a bit crude, but for a stupid person, even when they're right they're wrong, because when you're like in the industry, you know the mechanics, right? So you know the levers that are kind of going up and down to kind of determine rates better than somebody who throws a dart at a board and figures, okay, you know what, rates are going to go a certain way, and they're right. They're still wrong because there was no kind of thought process behind it. So I just kind of like, I ask these questions more to get into to get your perspective, because you know better than myself or my listeners, because you're seeing it every single day. You're seeing what's happening with the banks, with different lenders, with the borrowers. So I know the question is incredibly difficult and it's almost like putting somebody on the spot, but it's more trying to understand the logic behind what you feel is going to happen as opposed to what's really going to happen. That's kind of my kind of approach to the question. Now, having said all of that, back to kind of what I started this little rant with, was that majority of the times, I would say 80% or 90% of the times, variable outperform fixed. But there is that 10-20% of the time where fixed outperform variable. Are you saying then, is your opinion that we're kind of in the times where right now fixed is going to outperform variable in the next 3 years?
Yep. I mean, not necessarily like, I'm not saying necessarily from today forward if you were to pick one or the other. What I'm saying is,
Mm.
if we look at the last two two years, so if we reverse 2 years
Mm-hmm.
when people could get fixed rates, in the high ones, low twos, and we compare that window for 5 years, for sure,
Oh,
absolutely,
wow.
you're going to see fixed out variable. Right now, you take a fixed at high fours, low fives,
Mm.
and then right now the best kind of variable that you can take is sitting, 5.5 to like 5.5 to 6. So, to is that going to even come down to the high fours in general, let alone average out with what you started at to get down there? So I
Mm-hmm.
still think, yeah, in this right now, you might, over a 5 year period, I think you'll see, there's a good chance that the fix outperforms the variable, but there's a lot of
Yeah.
uncertainty in that equation over the next
Yeah.
little while. That's for sure.
Yeah, there's disclaimers, and yeah, and warranted ones. So then, my next question is, I guess, for 2023, how can potential buyers or investors prepare for 2023? Like, what should they be looking at when they're looking at? And I know a lot of this stuff we've kind of just covered, but how can they best prepare their portfolios to be able to take advantage of 2023? And the reason I say this is because I know, like you just kind of explained how you feel like we're going to get a 0.7 or 75 basis point hike in the next two rate hikes with the Bank of Canada. At the same time, and let me know if you agree or not, is the fact that real estate, I feel like, hasn't been on sale in Canada for quite some time. And I think we're at a point where it is on sale because you're getting some really good deals. Last year, this time, you had to put in a firm offer for a house that's like a million, million and a half, especially in the GTA and the bigger cities in Ontario, without any conditions. You couldn't, there was no house inspection. So you're almost like putting this asking this insane, or putting in this insane offer for a house without even knowing what the shortcomings of it is. But now you can actually put in an offer, put in a financing condition, put in a home inspection condition, negotiate the price, and get something that's reasonable. So I personally feel now it's like the best time to buy a house. So in terms of just preparing for 2023 and preparing for this market, what are some tips that you can give like home buyers on what they should be doing to prepare for taking advantage of some of these real estate prices?
Yeah, so just definitely have some strong recommendations on that. But just to your point, yeah, for me being in mortgages since 2010, there's probably been never a better time. I'm not going to say to get the best deal right now, but better
Mm,
conditions to be putting an offer in. Some of the things that you just
mm.
said, right? Actually being able to go see a property maybe twice before having to make the offer.
Yeah,
Actually having to get a home inspection
yeah.
done, or somebody that you trust, contractor, to actually physically assess the property and what might need some work in the short term, or what might not be a serious problem right now. Actually having some breathing room on your
Mm,
financing or an appraisal, right? Coordinating the ideal date if you're selling and buying, right? That often costs money. A lot of people don't build that into the scenario. If you're selling a house and buying a house, you obviously want the most money when you sell, and you want to pay the least money when you buy, but you need the money from your sale typically, or a bridge, let's just say,
mm.
to depending on the dates, right? Because if your house sells after when you buy, um, dates are important to people, right? So that can cost money to get the exact dates you want, right? And so again, when you have leverage on the buying side, sellers will listen to all these things. Whereas like for the last like better part of the last 2-3 years, it's been like, put the highest price on the paper, give us the date we want, have a strong deposit, and if you say or ask about anything else, your offer is going in the garbage, and you're probably not getting a response
Yeah,
because there's
yeah,
so much competition, right?
yeah.
So like, I mean, traditionally, if you look at like the last 30-40 years, or you look at some older generations, like still that, like, talk to my dad, he still doesn't register like the markets that we had, where it's like, okay, what you're telling me, the list price is this and we don't start here. Like I don't get it. The
Yeah.
list is like the price that we
Yeah.
never actually offer on, right? And it's like, what, you're not going to get a home inspection, you're not going to check out the house? Like, what do you mean? Like, it's just like, yeah, it's just there's so much demand now. There's things like that, right? And all those things, like, why I say they're the best conditions right now in a super long time for a buyer, is that you can do your diligence, you can be comfortable, you can assess this biggest purchase of your life essentially,
Yeah.
right? And you can put a plan together to manage the debt associated with it, your mortgage, right? That all equates to money, stress, peace of mind, you like allowing yourself to achieve other financial goals aside from just home ownership or buying an investment property to build wealth. So those all add up to things that are very important to people: money, time, peace of mind. Okay.
Mm.
And then on the flips, and also like the return of the lowball offer,
Yeah.
that's a thing that actually seeing, being not only entertained by selling agents and sellers. It's not just being entertained, it's being encouraged when
Yeah.
deals are like sitting on the market for something. Get me something, please. Send something in. So, obviously there's still houses that are selling with minimal days on market. It's all dependent on the situation, right? And the real estate agent, real estate partner you're working with is the expert on this. But we see it all the time with clients that we're working with and we're going through the process, and the partners we speak to and work with. So there are conditions there. It does happen, but you have to be working with the right team of experts who are giving you the right advice and taking the time to understand your situation, right? Do you want to, if you're qualified for a max of 700,000, do you and your real estate partner want to flock to listings at 8 and 900,000, knowing you can only afford to pay 700, and really try to dial in maybe one or two that are sitting on market for a long period of time to maybe make that work? There's a lot of time involved, potential like disappointment if they don't work, but
Mm.
it's something that we've seen people successful with in the past few months, 100%. And that's going to only continue to happen as sellers. There's certain sellers, they may need to sell desperately, like when they list, or within a couple months of listing and not getting what they need. Some people don't need to sell; they're just testing the waters, right? But I think the conditions are great. I mean, ultimately, I think that again, Bulker reports are that you read right now are predicting in in most parts in Canada somewhere between like another 10 to 15% drop in real estate prices. But you can find
Mm.
outliers to that. You can find reports that say that a lot of places in Alberta will grow by 4 to 6%.
Yeah.
You can find reports that certain parts of Ontario, like I think one namely Ottawa, might be growing 2 to 4%. Again, there's reports everywhere, right? I think largely the consensus prediction is another drop overall of like 10 to 15%. But what I think is what that's going to come down to is the sooner we know when the rate hikes are done, the more likely we are to end up on the lower end of that spectrum
Mm.
of price drops.
Mm. No.
Plan, there's not a lot of certainty of rates going up.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't agree with you more, and that's awesome advice. So, any of my listeners who want to reach out to Josh, just a reminder, his contact information is on the side or below, depending where you're listening from. But the thing is, and one of the things that I want to kind of add to what you're saying is that like definitely there's going to be sellers who will need to sell their house just because interest rates are too high and they can't afford the mortgage, and they thought that they did a really fine balance at like whatever their 1.39 interest rate that they got was, and now it's at 6%, and so they can't afford the house and they need to sell. So, and you're going to get some good deals, but for those listeners who are looking in and thinking, okay, you know what, as soon as I get it, I'm going to like be able to buy it right away. You need to be ready for that. You need to get your finances right. You need to be able to figure out what you can afford, because a lot of things have changed, and be ready for that deal to take advantage of that deal. Nobody's going to throw it on your lap, but you have to have all your ducks in a row so that when you do find something that you can jump on. And that's why I always say reach out to a broker like Josh to figure out like, okay, what's your kind of situation right now, and what can you afford, and then start looking in the areas, right, with your realtors that you're kind of interested in, to figure out whether, like when the right house comes on for the right price, you're there to be able to kind of take it over, or not take it over, but to be able to put in a good offer.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I could not agree with you more, just because like right now it's not even just like your dad saying, like my dad's the same way. He was like kind of like, what the heck's going on? That like you're supposed to negotiate. You're not supposed to blindly like put a number above the listing and pray to God that it gets accepted. But one of my biggest things is when you were last year, you paid $500,000 over. I mean, $500,000 over market price, today's market price. You still have to pay that $500,000, right? Today, if you pay $1 million and your interest rate's really high, in 3 years we refinance, but it's not like a principal amount that's gonna it's gonna go away. The interest payment is gonna come down. The principal, when you offer 1.5, it's going to stay there. It doesn't matter what the interest rate is. That is what you have to pay down. So, and as soon as interest rates start coming down, house prices are gonna start creeping back up again. It's not like it's gonna stay down.
Yeah, so that's yeah. So you see a lot of things put out there, and sometimes they're not explained with much context. Like, so I would liken that to like marry the house, date the rate,
Yeah.
or or something like your mortgage is amortized over 25, 30 years for most people when they start, but your term or rate is renegotiated every few years, right? So the
Yeah.
mortgage and payment you get on day one is not the same path and plan toward paying your mortgage off, or aligns in your budget the same way for that 25 to 30 years. It's not like the US where you can lock in a rate and a payment for 25 or 30 years. Here in Canada, if your renewal period or term is 5 years, well, in 5 years, you're going to have a brand new rate and term that you
Mm.
you work with. If you're breaking, which a large majority of people are doing at the 2 and 3 year mark, there's going to be some changes to your rate then, right? So making all the decisions on the largest purchase you're going to make, $1 million, $500,000 purchase, based on where the rates are today. I mean, I don't think makes a lot of sense, but I can appreciate why it would be a concern. And sometimes it's a concern when context not provided, right? So it is important. You got to afford payments associated with anything you're buying. Yeah, it could be a great deal, but if you're not going to make it to the point in which rates are lower and it helps your budget, well, that's a bigger problem, right? So it's like sometimes if you have like a 2-step plan as to, okay, this is what it's going to look like in the next couple of years, but from years 3 to 5 to 10, this is what we could project things looking like, or this might be happening or changing, like in employment or credit or family considerations. But going back to kind of your last question, which you're asking about, what are my top tips for people coming into 2023? Number one, and this is a top tip not only for this year especially, but always, is start before you're ready. And what that means is, we find a lot of people are waiting, and all the start is like 5-10 minute call. It's not going out and seeing a house. It's not making an offer. It's not submitting a formal mortgage application to get approved. It's start a conversation, okay, with a trusted mortgage professional, okay, because that's getting your financing in tune, okay, getting to understand your financial picture. There's always 2 conversations we have. There's affordability, so that's your budget, and then there's the qualifying. What will you get approved to borrow? When people are buying a house, they're not paying cash for it, most of it. So in order to get approved, they need to borrow money, and there's conditions around borrowing. So, but sometimes there's people who qualify for, say, they qualify for $1 million, but budget-wise, they don't really like what that looks like from a payment standpoint. And so they may qualify for something, but it's not in tune with their budget. And on the flip side, someone might want to qualify for $1 million, and they feel as though in their budget, they can afford the payment associated with $1 million mortgage or house, but qualifying wise, they won't get approved for it for certain reasons. So we've got to have both those conversations together. And it's very important to have that very, very early on in your thought of wanting to buy a house or an investment property. So we always encourage having that conversation. You don't know what you don't know. Credit, mortgages, real estate, it's not taught in elementary school. It's not taught in colleges for the most part. So unless you've gone through the process, and if you haven't gone through the process in the last 3, 4, 5 years, there's changes happening all the time. I'm learning new things all the time in my world, let alone someone who's not going through the process on a day-to-day, right? So it's really important to start before you're ready. And we find that the big mistake that a lot of people make is that they're waiting to have their down payment fully saved before they want to have a planning conversation. They're waiting until their student debt is fully paid off. They're waiting until they have that perfect job to start their planning conversation. And usually what happens is they wait until that perceived milestone to happen, and they're thinking that at that point they're ready and they want to be able to pull the trigger on a house within 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And what happens is, because they never had that detailed planning conversation 6 months, a year, 2 years in advance, they didn't know that they could do this, or this with their credit, with their job, and allocating savings or investments to boost their qualifying with some way that maybe didn't appear logical. Not saying that it didn't make sense, but if your goal is home ownership and qualifying for a mortgage, you doing this first with your money actually set you back in being able to qualify. So we want to just point out and build like a roadmap. You might not want to do any of the things, but we want to make sure that, hey, you want to buy a house, you want to make $1 million purchase, you want to make a $500,000 purchase, like here's the little roadmap. Like we're happy to sit with people 12, 24 months in advance, because so much can change and a lot of people don't know what's involved in the process. So that's the biggest mistake that we see, is not starting before you're ready with a simple planning conversation. It's free. There's not any kind of commitment to anything. It's just advice. That's what we're here for, and to build out a comprehensive plan. Man, people do more research on their cell phone plans, on buying a pair of shoes, buying a handbag, buying a jacket, buying a car, with a detailed plan 12 and 24 months in advance. And then people want to kind of just start their first conversation when they think they might be ready 30, 60 days in advance. And to no fault of their own, there's a lot of things that go into it that can help them get there sooner. And we often find that when with the people that do, like, we are able to get in front of 1 and 2 years in advance, if they're like, yeah, I got to do all these things, I'm probably nowhere close, but I'd still love to, start a planning conversation and build out my roadmap. They're often way closer than what they think to getting to that milestone timeline wise. So we always encourage it. It's super important. That's like my biggest piece of advice, and that's going to be a constant forever. The other thing is right now with rates being high, the stress test that the government has in place for mortgage qualifying is tougher to qualify, right? And so, I find it somewhat ironic in some ways because, people, I find they're offered help, let's say from family, in the form of, helping out with their down payment, helping with cheap labor to help them on a home renovation or their basement reno. Their family takes them on a free vacation. Their family will spend countless hours daycare for their young ones. And they have no problem taking that help. But where they draw the line is no cosigner. I'm not taking the cosigner. I'll take the help with all those other things that are way more expensive for my parents in terms of time and money. But the one thing that can push the home qualifying the most, a qualified cosigner that is no money out of the parents' pocket, it's minimal time with documents, but that's where they draw the line, whether it's pride or I'm not taking that help, but I'm taking help in all these other stories that are actually more impactful and it's for family. So not everyone has the help, but that's the one thing I encourage. And just remember, just like anything in life, nothing is permanent, just like a cosigner. Cosigners do not need to be married to your mortgage for 5 years. The moment something changes with your income and credit profile, we can go back to that lender and have that cosigner removed. That could be in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Like literally the application we have with your cosigner, you have one job or you have a certain debt that you haven't paid off yet. Fast forward 3 months, new job, new income, we can go reapply. Things have changed, remove that cosigner. You're not getting charged a mortgage penalty. Okay. Your terms will stay the same. There might be some legal, you would be the expert on this. We do a title change. So, I don't want to speak to costs on that. Is it $500, $1,000, $1,500? I don't know, something in that wheelhouse, I would imagine. Title change wise, and then you accomplish what you want. You get into the market a little bit earlier. That might be better for your acquisition cost. That might be better for your peace of mind, your plan, your family dynamic, all those things. But the cosigner is not permanent. And people are taking help in so many other ways with their family. And I just find it, I was literally thinking this a little while. We talk about it all the time. And I'm like, it's really ironic. All the help we seek out from family are willing to take, that equates to a lot of money and a lot of their time. But the one that's really not too hard on them time-wise and money-wise, that's where we draw the line. So there's reasons sometimes it doesn't make sense, but a lot of times I find the logic there when we break those other things down doesn't seem to add up.
No,
get the help. If you have, get the help.
I completely agree, and I did not know that there wasn't I always thought, and this is, I guess, my misunderstanding, that there was a financial penalty if you took the cosigner off. Changing title isn't that expensive. It's the more expensive part of it is if you have to pay a financial penalty, and if you don't, that's awesome. And so I couldn't agree with you more in terms of getting help. If you can, everybody needs help, and this is also why just by me kind of not understanding this finance part of it. I'm a real estate lawyer. I'm the last leg of this. I still don't know everything. Everything's constantly changing, and I'd always defer to you for any kind of financial information, just because I don't know. A mortgage used to be a mortgage, but now a mortgage isn't a mortgage. There's so many different things, and you need somebody who kind of is in the market all the time, who understands it, eats, breathes, sleeps this kind of stuff, to say, to actually help you explain and understand what's happening. So I could not agree with you more, even with the getting ready part, just because People I think right now have a mindset of there's a lot of people waiting on the sidelines thinking, you know what, I'm going to wait to time the market, and when it hits a bottom, that's when I'm going to jump in. That's the worst mindset to have, because when you can see the bottom, it's going up and it's going to go up much faster than it came down. And the time it takes you to get ready to be able to be in a position to buy because you didn't realize you had to put all these other pieces in place, you don't know where the prices are going to be. So the earlier the conversation, like you said, the better it is. And definitely for those listeners who want to reach out to Josh, again, his information is going to be side or below. Reach out, have a conversation, get ready with whatever decision you want to make. And I feel like, you know what, those tips was a great way to wrap up this podcast. Thanks for coming on, Josh. Any last words before we sign off?
No, you know what? I appreciate it, and it's always fun chatting about our craft and trying to hopefully add some tidbits or help for people who are aspiring for home ownership, looking to make a move to their dream home, or if it's building wealth through real estate investment. I still think that there's challenges in any market. Now the challenge is cost of borrowing being very expensive, but a lot of the time it's math. Math isn't particularly easy, but lean on people that help you out
Yep.
and paint the picture early on in the process. I think there are a lot of great people here willing to help, but make sure it's people that are taking the time to get to know you and your goals and asking you a bit more questions, so that they can kind of build out a roadmap for you sooner.
No, awesome. Thank you for coming on. Always a pleasure.
No, thanks, Eric. I really appreciate it, man.